Hello, my name is Annette Arlander, and this is an informal pre-recorded introduction to a conversation titled Principles of Artistic Research in Performance Doctorates. Although the title speaks of principles, I prefer in the following to speak of tensions, which somehow relate to debates about potential principles, of course. And some of the tensions are historical, not so hotly debated anymore, and what might seem like dichotomies or polarities are often continuums or fields with sometimes more than two poles, and they do not necessarily exclude each other. So excuse my simplifications, or like making, simplifications. But some basic tensions come from the terminology used and the associations related to the terms, beginning with the term performance. So do we speak of performance? Do we mean performing arts? Do we mean performance art? Performance as such goes beyond art, including sports, religious rituals, popular entertainment, performances of identity, and so on. But it is, of course, today also used to refer to stage performances, or performing arts more generally, like music performances, dance performances, theater performances, and so on. Here it obviously refers to something more limited, because it does not include film, music, or even dance. So what is left? Performance art, or perhaps theater? I spent a long time as professor of performance art and theory, very aware of the tension between performance art, like action art, body art, conceptual art, and performing arts. Performance art is a good place to investigate the tensions between performing arts and visual arts or fine art in the context of artistic research, and the different problems emerging from the different disciplinary traditions. That I have discussed in a text with the strange title, Characteristics of Visual and Performing Arts, in 2011. I add the references at the end of this video. The relationship between performance as research, which is an established methodology today, and artistic research, I have discussed in a more recent text called Introduction to Future Concerns, Multiple Futures of Performance as Research, in 2018. But that is only the term performance. What about the doctorate? One historical debate has been about Doctor of Art or PhD. And a little bit the same has happened to the term PhD as to performance, that it has become a generic title. Nobody thinks of it as being Doctor of Philosophy. But in my history, I'm a Doctor of Art. There was a division created at some point between doctorate with artistic emphasis or with scientific emphasis. And this reflected the historical development, for instance, especially in music, that in Finland, that there was a development of doctorates based on artistic excellence. So the idea of equivalence, not that we would speak of artistic research, but there was artistic excellence on the one hand, with, for instance, 5 concerts or five stage shows directed, and then a PhD, which was written, and they would be like equivalent amount of work. And this equivalence model was supported by some people to safeguard the sort of the freedom of the arts, but it deteriorated to the very opposite, making it not possible to create experimental art, but to have to sort of demonstrate excellence and so on. This was linked to the question of further education of the artist. So in the beginning, there was debates about should a doctorate, because it's a third cycle degree, include the idea that you become a better artist by doing the doctorate, or are you a better artist if you have a doctorate? And the tension between this claim and then the idea that it should be a research degree, so that artists would be training to become researchers, producing contributions to knowledge with the help of their own artistic methods. And then, of course, the third dimension is the question of pedagogy, because most doctors of art will in the future teach and supervise other doctors. A third tension comes from the question of a contribution to general philosophical knowledge or within humanities or social sciences, or a contribution to the development of the art form or the professional field, which are not necessarily the same, the art form of performance or the art form of professional municipal theaters, the sort of the professional field of the theater, cultural industry or show business, or however you want to speak with. So, or live art, for instance. For instance, in Nordic countries, in Norway and Sweden, there has been, because the major art schools in performing arts have not been universities until recently, there was something called artistic development work, which was really development of artistic work, which influences contemporary ideas of artistic research as well. Thus, there are different types of artistic research already within the Nordic context. There is one strand with the professional knowledge articulated, like any professional knowledge. Nurses, policemen, actors acquire knowledge through their working history, and that there are specific methods to try to articulate that knowledge. Or then there is the tradition of seeing artistic research and experimental art as very much linked. And especially when experimentation becomes more and more difficult within commercial arts, like performing arts often are, then the pressure for sort of experimental art and artistic research-based art, so to speak, grows stronger. Then there is the tension of the relationship to theory, of course, that's a big issue. Theory-driven research or theoretical notions derived from experience. We like to think that we're doing practice-led or practice-based research, or practice as research and developing concepts from the practice, but that is actually very difficult, and most artist research, and especially on doctoral level, they use theoretical notions from other fields, which brings in the fifth tension of artistic research as interdisciplinarity. On the one hand, between art and academia, or between art and some other discipline like art and pedagogy, or art and ethnography, or art and science, which is art and science collaborations you all know about, or literature and so on. For example, in Helsinki, the Department of Arts Education in dance and theater had a strong influence from social sciences on artistic research in performing arts in general, while in the visual arts, the arts education took place in another university, so that link was not existent in the same way. Of course, there is one big tension, but that's maybe on a meta level, concerning more like policies than the individual doctoral researcher, is the question of the doctorate as an academization of art, or the doctorate as an emancipation of the artist. So the critique of the academization of art, paradoxically, is often a conservative standpoint, wanting to keep art and knowledge apart by protecting artistic freedom. And the doctorate as emancipation and democratization of knowledge, part of the legacy of cultural studies, in a way that everybody's voice should be heard. Also, the artist's voice should be heard, not only the critics, the curators and producers and historians should be able to speak about a performance work and so on. Artistic research as research through art is one thing, so using your methods, your skills to investigate, or as an extension of artistic principles to critically investigate the field of artistic research itself as a form of expanded institutional critique is another issue. And of course, institutional critique is not so prominent in performing arts, but could be. Then there is a seventh tension, the balance between artistic output and written reflection. So from on one hand, no written part at all, except maybe a website and documentation of artworks, to only a written part, which is either to some extent poetic or fictional, like an artwork, or then just in some other manner encompasses the artist's perspective. There are examples of this both in Sweden and in Finland. And then should the written part be an exegesis of the practice, an exposition of the practice, somehow demonstrate and explain the practice, or should it be seen as a parallel or separate theoretical work approaching the research question or topic from another angle, so the theoretical work and the artistic work existing sort of side by side? And this is often preferred by many artists who don't want to speak about their practice necessarily. And of course, then there is a lot of tensions in the question how to write, what kind of style to use. Should we allow a personal account, a poetic text, or a process description? Should there be a focus on experience? Or should the format be more of a traditional thesis with introduction to previous research and contextualization of your contribution by writing about other artists' work, like in art research and theater history and so on? And more specifically, when you explicate, if you explicate, and when you explicate your process, how much focus on mistakes and failures to avoid a style of sort of marketing yourself as an artist? Or should you, on the contrary, be celebrating the innovations and openly marketing them for others to use, and so on? And of course, the one major tension is how strictly should we follow general third cycle degree requirements, and how much should we claim a special position of freedom for the arts? Of course, freedom for the arts is never so celebrated in performing arts. Paradoxically, they're never so free as in visual arts, simply not only for economic reasons, but because there is the spectator, the audience. Some of the tensions specific to performing arts, not necessarily performance art, but to the same degree, but especially to theater and performing arts, are related to, also music and dance, of course, are related to differences in relationship to the notion of work. I have suggested a sort of a four-field with combinations of either product-oriented or practice-led artistic research on the one hand, and then either developmental or future-oriented and reflective or sort of backward-looking artistic research on the other hand, which can be combined in different ways. Of course, this reflection can mean trying to not only to reflect on your own process of creating the work or developing the practice you're engaged with, but it could be like articulating the tacit knowledge existing within the field. I quote briefly from a text called Artistic Research as Situated Practice, Performing with Legion, which deals about, where I talk about my own work, but there is a chapter hidden which explains this four-field. I quote, "Research which entails an attempt to articulate and theorize an ongoing practice based on acquired and thus more or less unconscious skills often has a different focus and uses different methods compared with research that tries to develop and conceptualize an artwork or a new type of design product or performance and explain the route to that result. We could therefore distinguish on one hand product-oriented or object-led artistic research focused on the creation of an artwork or a design product or a performance from, on the other hand, practice-based or practice-led research engaged with an ongoing practice, often with a practical, critical or emancipatory knowledge interest. To make it simple, we could say that artistic research can be product-oriented when the main goal is the creation of a work, or practice-led when a particular form of practice is more important than a specific artwork or performance. If you think of improvising musicians or improvising actors or improvising dancers, where is the work? It's like a slice of the practice. Any slice could be seen as the work. Of course, this distinction could be attributed to traditions within the creative and the performing arts respectively, but these fields are increasingly blurred today, and contemporary art, for example, often focuses on processes and interaction rather than products and finished works. And in performing arts, practices or methods of teaching and methods of training can very much be reified into object-like products. Another dimension concerns the relationship to time, as I already mentioned. The research projects can be developmental, striving to create something new, experimental, innovation, whatever. It can also be reflective, trying to understand and articulate what one has already done. Either approach, or rather emphasis on either aspect, can be found within artistic research, although you would expect the developmental to dominate. Well, this is my bias. For the critically minded, however, the reflective approach provides a space for questioning and criticizing the ingrained conventions of the art world. For the more conservatively inclined, it offers an opportunity to formulate and document tacit knowledge and to articulate methods within an existing tradition. In some areas, for instance, the first doctoral candidate I supervised was a lighting designer. So to articulate the knowledge in that field and to somehow, we can speak of that in the discussion. But anyway, I'm overstepped my time, but I tried to summarize this. So we can form a classical field combining these four aspects: product-oriented and developmental, practice-led and developmental, product-oriented and reflective, practice-led and reflective. Of course, creating this kind of typology can seem like a useless habit borrowed from social sciences, but it could be clarifying if we remember that most cases of artistic research include all these aspects in some degree. As generic examples, we could imagine a research project aiming at developing a technological innovation, it's product-oriented and developmental, or a new method, it's practice-led and developmental, or a research project trying to understand the responses to an artwork or performance, product-oriented and reflective, or criticizing a traditional teaching technique, practice-led and reflective. In real life, clear-cut examples are hard to find. Nearly all research projects, for instance, include a reflective or backward-looking component simply because they are reported. And all forms of artistic research could be called speculative practices or experimental practices because the speculation, the imagining of alternative modes takes place with the help of and through the practice. So, end of quote. But of course, there are, I just mentioned quickly, we can discuss them more there are other tensions, especially in theater performance production, like tension between collaboration and individual work. Research traditions tend to focus on individual work, whereas art production in performing arts is often very much collaboration. There is also a tension between professional roles and auteur position or artist position. Like in a theater production, light designer, mask creator, costume designer, and so on have a different role than director, playwright, or choreographer. And there are hierarchical production practices which don't make it, it's not as easy for everybody to take the position of an individual researcher. Of course, there is also a historical tension between professional and amateur practitioners, which is, for instance, in Finland, in theater, it's very strong, and the professional qualifications are very much protected within the industry, so to speak. But maybe the main provider of tension is, of course, the role of the audience as co-creator, because it's not possible to go too far in experimentation if you don't get the audience with you. So therefore, one of the main tensions in performing arts, or especially in theater, I would say, is between experimentation, cutting-edge exploration, versus articulating tacit knowledge of existing traditional practices in the industry or show business. There is an inherent conservatism in much theater, sometimes even anti-intellectualism, paradoxically, coming from maintaining traditional ways of working and a dislike of analyzing instead of gut feeling and so on. So there is a tension between so-called free art, however free that ever is, and the demand of the show business, however fringe one wants to see one's show business. I guess you can find more tensions in the discussion. To summarize briefly, there are very many views of what constitutes proper artistic research, and for me personally, remembering to acknowledge this diversity and supporting differentiation actually, rather than trying to create consensus, is important and valuable and sort of helps in maintaining a healthy research environment. And now some links, but thank you for your attention.